Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Tes. The last daf in the Bava Meci'ah is we learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Yisrael Matzar V'Shibli. We'll start with the Mishnah, the bottom Mishnah, the last second Mishnah on Kuf Yud Ches and Beis. Shtei Ginos Zu Agabi Zu. Two gardens owned by two different people. Let's say Ruvain is on top, meaning you have two gardens right next to one another. However, they're not at the same vertical distance. Reuben's gun is, let's say, 10 feet taller than Shimon's gun. They're right next to each other, right? They're next to each other, but Reuben's is taller, Shimon's is lower. One is on top. It doesn't mean on top. One of this means that it's higher than the other. Now, what grows in Reuben's field is in garden is Reuben's. What grows in Shimon's is Shimon's. What happens if there's stuff growing out of the effective wall between the two? Not that there's a wall there, not a physical wall, but since Reuben's is taller and Shimon's is shorter, so if Shimon is looking up at Reuben's, he's seeing a wall there. He's seeing Shimon's ground, Shimon's dirt, earth. Now there's stuff growing out from Reuben's field, meaning it's in his earth, right? It's underneath, it's in his borderline. You have a border there. It's between him. It's growing out into Shimon's airspace. Who does that vegetation belong to? The vegetables, let's say, are between them growing out. Rav Meir Shapiro says it belongs to the upper guy. Draws the upper guy's earth, which is growing them, right? It's in the lower one's airspace. It's in Shimon's airspace. Rav Meir says, well, it should go to the guy on top. It should go to Reuven, the upper guy. If he takes away his dirt, in other words, if he digs down and takes away his dirt, let's say he brings down his level of his ground all the way down to Shimon's, then there's no vegetation. So obviously he controls it. He could take his dirt away. He could take his earth away. The lower guy also has a right to it. It's in his airspace. If he would fill up that airspace, bring in a few trucks and fill up his airspace, in other words, make his earth taller so that it reaches Reuben's, that would also destroy the vegetation. So therefore, they both have a claim. Amar Meir, since they can both object to the other, they can both prevent the other, in theory, from having these vegetation. The upper guy can take away his dirt. The lower guy can raise his dirt. So since they can each object to one another, look where it's living from. Look where it's growing from. It's growing from, Reuben says, it's growing out of my earth. It's coming literally out of my, where is this getting its nourishment from my earth? Yes, it's true, it's in hanging over in your airspace, but the roots are in my dirt. That's what Rav Meir's opinion was. Amar Rav Shimon. So Rav Shimon gave a psak. Kol she'elyon yachol lifsho es yado v'litol harei shelo. What happens is this. Reuven is on a higher level, right? So how is he going to get those vegetation, the fruits, whatever they are? Let's assume that's vegetables, cucumbers, whatever. So how is he going to get them? By leaning over, right? He's got to lean over, stick his hand into Shimon's airspace to get them. So whatever he can reach, whatever he can reach by his hand without straining himself, just whatever is available to him, belongs to him. The rest belongs to the lower guy. Now, Rashi learns this different ways to learn shot over here. Who does it really belong to? Right? Who does it really belong to? Some say, pardon?
Is it like a tree?
It's like a tree. It's the same thing. Exactly. It makes a difference.
So the branches are hanging over.
Okay, so right. So that could be is a different situation. That's a different situation. if he can reach them. If he can reach them. Here, you're right. It could be a similar thing. If the stuff reaches over, we'll talk about that. I'll give an example. If you're talking about obtaining the fruits thereof, so it depends. If it grows in the other guys, if all the roots are in Reuven's field and the roots are there and the fruits are growing into Shimon's field or in Shimon's field, who's entitled to them? Technically, Reuven's entitled to them. However, because of common custom, it could be that Shimon's allowed to take some of them too, as we'll see. But Mikra Adin, it depends on where the roots are. We said if the roots are divided, they split them. Remember, we had that case also. We're going to talk about that more in Baba Basra. But over here, some say, who's really entitled to them? Some say the psak is machlokes Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, we go like Rabbi Yehuda. It's really the entitlement goes to the one whose airspace it's in, to the lower guy, Shimon. However, he's mochel the ones on top because it's hard for him to reach those and it's easier for Reuben to. Rashi doesn't learn that way. Rashi learns that what Rav Shimon means is we go like Rav Meir, but it really Rav Meir holds that they belong to the top guy because the stuff's growing out of his earth, out of his dirt. It's coming out of him. Except since it's going to be embarrassing for him to ask Shimon, can I come into your field to pick the stuff that I can't reach from my field? So he's mochel. So technically, according to Rashi, technically Rav Meir is correct, except the Rav Shimon paskin this way, whatever the top guy can reach belongs to him because it's really his. What he can't reach, he's mochel to the lower one. So the way Rashi learns is that we really go like Rav Meir. Well, Rashi says the last couple of lines. He's mafka, the other one's like a bay. It's embarrassing for him to go in. Can I come into your yard and get the stuff out of it that's growing out of the side? So he's embarrassed. That's smash from Rashi that Rav Shimon's really paskening like Rav Meir. Maybe in a stam case we pass Rav Meir, maybe we ask a rebuke against Rav Meir, but over here we have Rav Shimon, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, Rav Shimon's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai paskening that we go in this case like Rav Meir because it's coming out of his land, but he's mochel the stuff that's below because it's too hard for him to reach. Now, what's really the machlokas? When you think about it, what's going on over here? The roots are definitely in Reuven's field, right? Reuven's dirt, right? Because he's the upper guy. So the roots definitely are coming out of there. The leaves, the fruits, whatever grows out, are in Shimon's airspace. So Rava explains it like this in the Gemara. Everybody agrees that the roots belong to Reuven. Could Shimon have a right to go in to Reuven's dirt, dig in there, and take out roots? Or let's say someone grows there, let's say potatoes. Potatoes grow in the earth, right? Would he be able to take out those potatoes? They're certainly growing. They're certainly totally in Reuven's field. So everybody agrees that the roots belong to the upper guy, Reuven. Keep giving over. The question is about the leaves. The leaves, the stuff that's above ground. That's above ground. Rav Meir holds shari yufo basar ikra. This is the gears that we have. Some have different gears. Rav Meir savar shari yufo basar. You say that the leaves, in other words, the stuff that's above ground follows the roots. If the roots belong to Reuven, so do the leaves. Rav Yudah savar lo amin and shari yufo basar ikra. You don't say that. That's the machlokas over here. Everybody agrees that the roots are in Reuven's land. Obviously, the question is, do you say that if there's roots and then there is outgrowth, leaves, whatever, we'll talk about a tree, whatever comes out, whatever's above ground, does that follow what's in the roots or not? Rav Meir says yes, Rav Yudah says no. Then, the Oslo Tamayos, we take out that, Marshal's gear says, the Tani Nami, Gabi Mekachomemkar. When it comes to business, also we have a similar idea, Kihai, the Tanya, Ayotse, 2 lines from the bottom of the Gemara. Now here's the rule. We're going to talk about this in Bava Basra. If a man, I'd say I buy a tree, you have a field, or Shimon has a field, Reuven buys one tree in that field. So all he owns is the tree. He's entitled to get the fruits, etc. Right? But he only owns the one tree. Okay, now something grew out of the tree. Right? Another tree just sort of blossomed out of another tree. I guess if it came out of the trunk of the tree. The trunk is the area above ground that sees the sun, but within 3 tefachim of the ground, the lower part of the what we call the trunk of the tree. So let's say something grew out of there, or something grew out of its roots. Or El Shabalakarka, the Rav Meir says this is the gears that we have, is that belongs to Balakarka. Because if something else grew, you bought this tree, right? Now another tree is growing in that area. If it came out of the roots, that belongs to the owner of the ground. You only bought the one tree. You didn't buy the tree. You bought the tree, one tree. We'll see. If you bought 3 trees, you own the area between them 2. But if you bought 1 or 2 trees, you only own the tree. Now another tree grew out of the ground. Well, if it grew out of the roots, certainly it belongs to the owner of the ground, not the owner of the tree. Meir says even if it came out of the trunk of the tree, because the trunk is like the roots, because the trunk follows the roots, just like we just said, according to Rav Meir, what grew out of the roots is like the roots itself. So here also, when it comes to that, let's say you bought 1 tree, and now something grew out of the trunk or out of the roots, that belongs to Balakarka, not according to you, different Rav Meir. Doesn't belong to you who bought the tree. Rav Yudah says no. I guess if it came out of the trunk, I've owned the trunk. The guy who bought the tree owns the tree. If it came out of the trunk of the tree, Shalbalim belongs to him too. He owns the tree and he owns what grew out of the tree. Umen Ashrashim, if it came out of the roots, Shalbalakarka. This is what we said, like in our Mishnah, that Rava says, everybody agrees that the roots belong to Ruvain, to the upper guy over here. And similarly, if you bought a tree and now something grew out of the tree, if it grew out of the roots, well, the roots are the roots. The roots belong to the owner of the ground. Yes, indeed, when you bought the tree, you're entitled for your tree to get nourishment from the ground. But if something else grew out of the ground, that belongs to the Balakarka, according to everybody. The question is, if it grew out of the trunk, does the trunk follow the roots, like Rav Meir says, like he said in our Mishnah, and he says here too, or what grew out, what's above ground? Let's call it above ground. Does above ground follow what's in the roots or not? So Rav Meir says yes, Rav Yehuda says no. Okay, so that's when it comes to Mekach HaMemker. So we have our Mishnah. We have there about when it comes to buying and selling a tree. Now. A similar thing comes to Arla. What's the deal with Arla? Arla is the first 3 years of a tree. You're not allowed to have anah from the fruits, right? You can't sell them. You can't do anything. You have to let them go. Just let them rot. You don't do anything. You can't have anah from it. The first 3 years. The 4th year, it's called Neteravai, right? It's like Meiser Sheni. You got to be po to take it to Shalayim. Okay, in the 5th year you can eat it. Okay, what about this case? Let's say you bought a tree, right? Or you have a tree. Now it's not even an issue of buying a tree or owning a field. That was the case of Mekach HaMemker. Let's say you have a tree. You have a tree already. It's not a question of who owns it. But now something grew out of the roots under the tree or out of the trunk. Meir says, listen, if another tree grew out of same area where your tree is, but it came out of the roots or out of the trunk of the trunk is like the roots. Therefore, our girsa is that Rav Meir holds, this is the Tosefta, that Rav Meir is the one that says you're chayv and all. There's other girsas too. It says you're patrim, Rav Meir holds you're chayv and all. Why? It's a new tree. It's a new tree. A new tree, you can have one tree which is 20 years old and you can eat those fruits. And then you have another tree grew out of the trunk of that tree. Is that a new tree or part of the same tree? If it's a new tree, chayv and arla. That's what Rav Meir says. Even if it came out of the trunk or out of the roots, you're chayv and arla. If it grew out of the roots, it's a new tree. Even if it grew out of the geza, which is the trunk of the tree, 3 tfachim from the ground above that sees the sun, that's like the roots itself. Again, you see the Rav Meir holds that what grew out of the tree follows the roots. What grew out of the roots follows the roots. So Yosman Gezim and Shashim Chayv Arla, Rav Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Min Gezer Potter. If it came out of the trunk, that's like a branch of the old tree. That's not Chayv Arla. If it grew out of the roots, then you're Chayv. So we say the same idea over here. Whether you're talking about buying a tree in a field, and then another tree grew out of the roots or out of the trunk. Whose tree is that, right? Whose tree is that? Does it belong to the owner of the land or owner of the tree? And a similar thing when that's not a question of owning who owns the tree. So you have a tree, and one person owns a tree, but now another tree grew out of that tree. If it grew out of the roots, chayv and arla, according to everybody. If it grew out of the trunk, that's a machlokas. Does the trunk follow the roots? In which case, it's a new tree, and therefore you're chayv and arla or not. Why do we have to have both these cases, both by Mekach HaMemker and by Arla? It's a stricha. In other words, we see the same machlokas, right? The same machlokas of Rav Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in 3 places in our Mishnah. Does the what grew out of the roots follow the roots or not? Right? The question is, does he follow the roots or not? And we see by Mekach HaMemker and by Arla the same thing. Why do we need both these cases, these brises? But stricha. If you tell me the first case of Mekach HaMemker, but how come Rabbi Yehuda? There, Rabbi Yehuda says that if a new tree grew out of my trunk, right, my trunk, that belongs to the owner of the tree, not to the owner of the karka. It's a question of who owns it. It's a question of ownership, right? If it grew out of the roots, so then you could say it's my land, and there's another tree grew out of my roots. But if the guy who bought the tree, if it grew out of his trunk, he says, listen, it's his tree, it belongs to him. So it's a question of moment. When it's a question of Isser, You have to go to Chumrah. Maybe he's modeled for a mayor that even if it grew out of the trunk, it's considered a new tree. Chayiv and Arla. Be it and if you tell me only the case of Arla, there a mayor is machmer and says that even if the new tree grew out of the trunk, it's like it grew out of the roots and it's a new tree in Chayiv and Arla. But maybe in the case of money, matters whose tree is it? It grew out of the trunk. Everybody agrees if it grew out of the roots, it belongs to the owner of the karka. But it grew out of the trunk. The mayor says it's like it grew out of the roots, it belongs to the owner of the karka. Rav Yehuda says no. If it grew out of the trunk, it belongs to the person who bought the tree. It's a question of mammon. So maybe there, even Rav Meir's mother, when it comes to question of mammon, it belongs really to the guy who bought the tree in the first place. And if another tree grew out of that trunk, it still belongs to the owner of the tree. So you might think there are Meir's mother's Rav Yehuda Kamash Muam. Tzricha that we need both cases to tell you that Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda argue in all cases. And like we saw in our mission, that we say in our Mishnah that the what grew out of the roots follows the roots.
We usually ask this kind of question when you have both cases in the Mishnah. But here, this is a Tosefta and this is a Mishnah. I mean, the distinction is a very good one.
Right.
It's structurally, it's a strange question.
It could be. I think you could have two Bryces. Yeah. Right. I don't think you have to say that they're both Bryces, effectively. Bryce and a Tosefta. It's not. It says Tanan Nami Gabriola, but it says on the side it says Tosefta. So it's just telling you that I don't think that's a problem. The fact that it's not in a Mishnah. Maybe it seems that way. I don't know. I think you can find many places in Shas where you have the Bryces. Yeah, you have the same machlokas in several Bryces. Why do you have to teach me in each one? Or you could say, sometimes the Gemara says, what was said by one wasn't said by the other. But here clearly, Rav Yehuda and Rav Meir are arguing about something. It's a chiyuv. It's the same idea. If the tree grew out, of the trunk.
Very, very good.
Right.
I understand it.
Okay.
But
could be.
The way you ask the question is usually when you have both cases in the Mishnah.
But right. You could ask even better. The Gemara is only answering. The Gemara is only discussing why do you have Mekach Memka and why do you have Arla? Yeah. What about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah is effectively telling you the same thing too. Yeah. You could ask why do you need the Mishnah and the Brisa, right? Because the Mishnah and the Brisa are both talking about ownership, not about Orla, not about Isser. So once you have the Mishnah, what do you need the Brisa of Ayotzim and Gezim and Shirashim? What do you need that for? Why do you need the Machlokes from Meir of Beauty? You could see it already in our Mishnah. You could ask even better, right? Why don't you say that? You could argue and say maybe they thought there was a different case, or because we paskin in our Mishnah like Rav Shimon, that one's mochel the other, different gears, etc. So these are all good questions. Rav Shimon says, Kol Sha'alin Yachol Livsho. If the upper, so he paskin, and that's the psak, that if whatever the upper person can reach down and take, that's his. He shouldn't strain himself. He shouldn't force himself to stretch all the way down. Can you hold my ankles? And I'm gonna lean over and make sure I don't drop down. That's too much. Just take what you can reach, and the rest he's mochel. Okay, so you say whatever the upper guy can reach is his, and the rest he's mochel to the bottom guy, points away Rashi. So what happens? He can reach the cucumbers, let's say, or whatever grew out, the flowers, whatever. He can reach there, but he can't reach in all the way down and then inside to get the roots. Let's say, or the roots are lower. Let's say the roots are lower and it's growing up and out. So if he can reach the leaves and not the roots, what do you say there? Or Magil Ikro and Magil Nofo. Maybe when the roots are at, let's say, one level at a height of 6 amos, let's say, and when it grows out into overhangs Shimon's airspace, gravity pulls them down. So you can reach the roots, but you can't reach the leaves. What do you say there? Take away that question stands. And then Farshim talk about what would be the halacha. You should split it in those cases, etc. Okay. Amar Ephraim Safra. Says Ephraim Shriveman. I can never avoid saying that every time, right? As Ephraim Safra, Ephraim Shriveman said, Talmido shel Rav Shlokish. He was a Talmud of Rav Shlokish. Mishum Rav Shlokish said the name of Rav Shlokish. Halach Rav Shimon. That's being more passages, even machlokas from Meir and Rav Yehuda. Stam go like Rav Yehuda, but Rav Yehuda says it is like Rav Shimon. It's more of a pshara, really, because he says I really hold like Rav Meir, or I really hold like Rav Yehuda, but the other one's mochel. If you hold halachas like Rav Yehuda, that means that the lower one is mochel to the upper one, whatever what he can't reach. And if you hold like the way Rashi learns, the paskin like Rav Meir, except that the upper one is mochel, but he can't reach, reaching down. So like Rav Shimon, Amruah Kamei Shvor Malka. They said this halacha in front of Shmuel Malka. Shmuel Malka was a Persian king. Now, in many places, Shmuel Malka was known. He was a Persian king who was very learned, and he was known to befriend Shmuel, the Shmuel in the Gemara. So sometimes when the Gemara refers to Shmuel Malka, it's really referring to Shmuel. But Rashi rejects that explanation over here because when the Gemara says that they said this halacha, Ephraim Safra, Talmud of Rav Shimon said, we pass like Rav Shimon in our Mishnah. They said this for Shmalka. Amar Lahu, he answered them, Apirion Neptaya Rav Shimon. Let's bring like a canopy, like a chuppah for Rav Shimon. It's a nice halacha. Like I agree with that. Apirion Neptaya, let's bring Rashi says, Apirion Chen Shalonu, like our grace is on him. That's a nice thing. So Rashi says, if it were referring to Shmuel, if Shmuel Malka were referring to Shmuel, what, you had to tell this halacha, Shmuel didn't know that our Mishnah, if he didn't know that doesn't make sense. Ephraim Safra, the Talmud of Rish Lakish, tells this halacha to Shmuel. Shmuel didn't know the Mishnah. It doesn't make sense, the whole thing. He didn't know the halachas like Rav Shimon, etc. Until he heard it from in the name of Rish Lakish. So it's not like you say it's Shmuel. Rather, Shmuel Malka was the Persian king. So some of the Farshim say, Shash brings down, how are you allowed to teach halachas to a goy? Not supposed to teach him Torah. So he explains that dinim are really part of the Shev Mitzvah Bnei Noach, which they're allowed to. And he was learned in dinim. He was a learned man, and you're supposed to teach them. It's not even an option. You're supposed to teach them dinim so that they should know. That's one of Shev Mitzvah Bnei Noach. It expands to Bezdin that they're supposed to set up a Bezdin, but dinim they're supposed to know. And this is a common practice. So the question over here is, whose is it when it's in between? Now you asked before about a tree growing in. We had a case here in Ramot. Somebody here in the shul had a problem with a neighbor who was renting a house next door to his, and a tremendous amount of foliage and trees grew over into his. The tenant in the other house, this guy owns his house. The tenant in the other house says, I'm not, what do you want from me? I'm not taking care of the garden here. That's not my job. And it grew into this guy's, to the owner's field. So the logic would say, it's his responsibility. If stuff is growing from his field into yours, then he should take care of it. So they asked for Rav Asher Weiss, and he poskin no, that the custom is whatever grows in your property, you have to take care of. So if you have a neighbor who has a big tree or bushes or whatever it is, anything that grows into your yard, if it's in your yard, you're supposed to take care of it. That's the common practice. Not necessarily the Ikar Adin in the Torah, but that's the common practice, and you have to follow that minhag. So you're responsible. I have it also. Every year I have to cut down stuff in order to build my sukkah. The neighbors, he has this rubber tree that goes way over and keeps going bigger and bigger and bigger, and the bark gets thicker, and it's like a tree. It's like a trunk, gets bigger and bigger. Every year we have to trim it. I have to trim it. I can't tell him to trim it. What's he supposed to do? Come into my yard and trim it? That's the same thing. It's embarrassing to go in the other yard. So that's what that's the psak. Allah Habayis V'Aliyah V'Slikim V'Sachtim Tziyah V'Achshem. We finished 4 months of Mציעא. Now we're going to begin Bava Basra, and we'll do the Hadran as soon as maybe we'll wait for a minyan. Okay. So now we begin the Masechet Bava Basra. Bava Basra, of course, means Basra means the last one. Makama is the first one. We divide Masechet Nezikin into 3. Makama is the first. Mציעא is the middle, and Basra is the end. And this last parak that we've learned about Mציעא really continues on. This is really like a preamble for Basra. We're talking about ownership and whose is whose, etc. That's what we're dealing with here. So here we have, and you have to remember, in those days, everybody lived in houses or apartments that opened up into a chutzner. If you go to the poorer areas of the world, you will see that nobody cooks or does stuff in their house. It's all outdoors. They don't cook indoors, otherwise they burn the houses down. A lot of the activity was done outside in the yard. Now, so they had a shared yard, like you said, a bayit mishutaf. This is a chatzer mishutaf. This was a common thing. However, as we'll see in the Gemara, there's a shaila whether, I don't want you seeing what I'm doing. That's called hezekriya. That's damage by sight. I don't want you looking at we want privacy. I want to be able to do things, and I don't need everybody looking at my stuff. People put up fences all over the place now in their own yard to prevent people from Rishus Harabim looking inside. That's all legitimate. So here the Mishnah says, "Ashutfin shiratzu lasas mechitza." I'm going to try to avoid. I always say that idea that why does the Masechah start off with this case? Because you should know that people always go into partnerships, right, for one reason or another, but at the end they always break up. It's telling you right now, Shittin isn't made to work. The Rosham didn't make the world that way. You have your own family, your own house, your own car, whatever. Shittin doesn't work. We teach kids, oh, you should share. You don't share. Nobody shares. Sharing is not the natural way. That's all. It's good to give to others, to donate to others, to help others, but sharing usually doesn't work. So here we give a case where Shittin Shirotz Lasses Mechitza, B'chotzer. They agreed, they both wanted to make a chalitza and chotzer. What do we mean? The Gemara is going to talk about all these cases that when you have a chotzer, a big chotzer, some may have a bigger house or a bigger area, right? So that their house is bigger and the frontage of their area is on more of the chotzer than the guy with the smaller apartment, let's say, or house, or let's call it even a house. It could be a one-story house. One has a smaller one, one has a bigger one, but they share a chotzer. Now they've agreed to split it. Hashittin sherotzu lasses mechitza. Their lashon is key. Sherotzu, they wanted to make a chalitza mechotzer. If they agreed to do it, bonin esakosa, they build the wall. So here we're going to see the Gemara is going to talk about this right away. Lasses mechitza. They wanted to make a split. So then b'chotzer bonin esakosa. Well, does mechitza and koso mean the same thing, or are they two different things? It could be, mechitza sounds like it's a wall, right? But why use a lashon? Why not say shorotz lasses koso? Or if mechitza means the wall, shorotz lasses mechitza means the wall, so bonin so it should say, how do you build it? So first we'll see that really the Mishnah is talking about a case. The Gemara is going to say that if there's a big enough area in the chotzer, meaning there's enough area that each one would get 4 amas by 4 amas. An amma is about 18, 20 inches. And 4 amas is like, it's like, a meter and a half or a yard and a half. So if there's an area of 4 by 4, if each one could have an area of 4 by 4 besides 4 amas leading out from their door, then one can force the other to split it and make a wall between them because there's enough area. That's called a chotzer that's made to split, right? A chotzer a chotzer sheyesh bo chalukah, that you can split it up. However, our Mishnah speak about even if the chotzer wasn't that big. If the chotzer wasn't that big, that if they would split it, there would be enough area 4 by 4 in the chotzer for each of them. But if they agreed to do it anyway, I don't want to look at your stuff, you don't look at my stuff, that means they agreed. So Hashiftin Shiratzu Las Mechitza, if they wanted to make a mechitza, they agreed to make a mechitza. It wasn't like one forced it. Again, if there was a big enough area, if it was a chotzer which is made to split up, meaning it's big enough, then one can force the other to split it. Or others, as we see, today in our country, especially where we have, bayit mishutaf and vad bayit and stuff like that, and not everybody agrees on what should be done. So you have to, sometimes you have to agree, or you go by the majority. But over here, they agreed to do it. It wasn't really big enough to split, but they agreed to. So how did they do it? They build a wall. Build a wall, as we'll see. Maybe this goes with the idea that has agreed, and as they agreed to split it. But one could say, when I agreed to split it, I just thought, we'll make a little sign over here, or a few sticks in the ground, staves in the ground, to show what's mine, what's yours. No. You can build a wall. Once they agree to split, you can build a wall because I don't want to see your stuff. You don't want to see my stuff. 4 amas high, a high wall. So they build it in the middle, meaning even if I have more area than you because I have a bigger house and more frontage. But we both have to contribute equally to the wall because we both agree. So you build the middle. If the minig is, now how do they build it? We're saying here you build a wall which prevents people from seeing over them. Now, but what do you build it with? What kind of bricks? If the minig is to use gvil, which is hewn stones that are not chiseled, they're still rough, and they're about 6 tefachim wide. Right, so we'll see. So you build. You each have to allow for half the area in their chotzer for the wall. The wall's got to be on top, split evenly between the two chatzeros that you're going to wind up with. Gozis, if you're going to use chiseled stone, which are smaller, so you build it that way. Kfisen, half bricks that way. Levanin, bricks, bonin. You build whatever the normal structure is for that area, but we're talking about bricks or stone where you can't see over. Medina. So then he goes on to explain everything going to Medina. Big veal, if it's veal, if you're using rough stones, which are 6 tefachim wide. Each one contributes 3 tefachim from his ground for this wall. They each have to do, even if the area they're going to wind up with is more or less depending on how much frontage you have, but the wall is split evenly between them. Because as if you use chiseled stone, which are only 5 tefachim wide, each guy gives 2.5. In other words, you give whatever you have to give from your land towards the, on the border between my chutzner and your chutzner. We each have to contribute half of the width of the bricks. Big feast, and if it's half bricks, if it's half bricks, a brick is 3 tefachim wide. If you use half bricks, you really wind up with the wall is going to be 4. Why? Because half bricks are 1.5 tefach and 1.5 tefach, which is 3. But then you have to put a tefach of cement in between, so it comes out you have 4 tefachim. So each guy has to contribute 2 tefachim from his area towards the area for the wall. But if you're using bricks, if you're using regular bricks, which are 3 tefachim wide, so each guy contributes 1.5. Each guy basically has to contribute half of the width of the stones or bricks. Therefore, if years later, 10, 12 years later, the whole wall fell down, as it happens, right? So the area and the stone belongs to both of them. No one can claim, I built the wall. It's my wall. So my area, right? You know how to do that. Remember in Chutz La'aretz where you had those fences, those wire fences in your backyard? And I remember we had, if the pole was on the inside, that demonstrated that it's yours. If the pole that held it up, that showed that it's yours. Who owns the fence? So then the fence is really, if you built it on your property. Or if it was so thin that you couldn't tell. But if it's a thick wall, so there could be a discussion. Okay, let's say the wall fell down years later and nobody wants to construct it again. Who gets to keep that area? So he says, you know what? If the wall fell down, both the area and the stones belong to both of them. V'chein begina. Remember, we just had this case in the last parak about if the stones fell in, you took them, or who did they belong to, etc. V'chein begina, the same thing with a garden. Makom shenago ligdor machayven also. Again, now in a garden, you don't have the same concept of privacy. I'm cooking, I'm getting dressed, I'm putting my wash out, whatever. You go out in the street and you see everybody hanging their underwear out. Some people are concerned about privacy. That's fine in a chutzner attached to your house where you have private things. In a ginah, maybe in a garden, maybe less privacy is necessary. So it depends. The Gemara is going to say, if the minig is to divide it, you divide it. If the minig is not to divide it, not. But let's say there's no minig. If the minig is to make a fence there, you mechayiv to do it, right? That if that's the minig. Or the Gemara will say, even if there's no minig, you can force them to do it. But in a valley or a plain where they plant grain, etc., which is normally a place where you don't make it, then you can't force them to do it if there's no minig. If the minig is to do it, they could do it anyway. You follow the minig, but if there's no minig, what do you do? So he says, in a garden, if there's no minig, you could chayv them to do it because a garden is smaller and people are concerned about I don't want you seeing what I'm growing, etc. In a bika, less so. So if there's no minig, you can't force them. Elim ratza. So what do you do if I can't force you to build a wall? As we said, in the case of a chutzner attached to a house, Amish is talking about where they both agreed. It was a small area. There wasn't enough of an area for one to force the other to build a wall. But if they both agreed, they agreed, and that's how you build a wall. In a field of grain and a bikah, you can't force him if he doesn't want to. Elam Ratza, if you want to build a wall, build it on your property, right? You know where the demarcation is of my boundary versus yours. Then build it on my property. Elam Ratza, build it. Ubona, you make now a facing on the outside. In other words, to show that the wall is mine, that years later going to say, who built that wall? No, I put a facing on the outside showing that it's mine. Why don't you put it facing on the inside? Because if you put a facing on the inside, the other guy can put a facing on his side and say that it's his, right? So you put the facing on the outside, so we know the facing, so it's a mark or some mark of distinction that says that that identifies the walls belonging to the guy on the other side of the facing with bichach. So if later on the wall falls down, belongs to him, to the one who put up the fence. If they both agree, bonus goes to them. So then you build a wall in the middle. Those chazim can mekai. If they both agree, and there's a question who did it. Now you put a facing on both sides to show that it belongs to both of them. I put it on the opposite side. You put it on the other side. If it falls later on, belongs to both of them. So that's what the Gemara says in terms of building events. If you both agree to it, so he said you both have to agree to it, unless it's a minig. If the minig is to do it in a garden or a bika, you follow the minig. If the minig is not to do it, you can't force them. If there's no minig, we'll see. It means in the garden one can force the other guy to do it, and in a grain field one cannot force the other guy to do it. So he can build it on his own and put the facing on one side, indicating that the whole wall and that area of the wall belongs to him. So the Gemara first says like this: the Gemara assumed that when a Mishnah says Hashut Mishurot Salas Mechitza means a wall, they agreed to make a wall, meaning that they didn't have to build a wall, but they agreed to build a wall. You have a wall of a kerem. Let's say my grain field abuts on your vineyard. Now, if your vineyard grows into my grain field, we're going to have a problem of client. So you have to generally separate 4 amas unless there's a wall there. If there's a wall there, you can plant the vineyard can plant right up to the wall. But let's say the wall fell down. The owner of the grain can tell Gedor, better put it up again. Otherwise, you're gonna ruin my grain. There'll be puzzle. There'll be a client. Omelo Gedor, and he should have said Omelo Gedor Chazra, and he did it. Chazra, and if it fell down again, Omelo Gedor, I told him again. Nisyayish, and then if he neglected a mena below God, if he didn't do it again, a reza kiddush, then he's ruined it. He's ruined my grain, whatever got mixed up over there. And he has to pay for it. So the same idea here, that you see that mechitza can mean a wall. So over here it sounds like Hashitun Sharatzu Lasu Mechitza. They wanted to build a wall. Taima, the Ratzu, hello Ratzu, he didn't want to build a wall, they just wanted to separate it. And I said, let's have a demarcation line. We'll put a string or something simple, a ribbon, whatever. You can't force them. Alma has agreed according to this. If you learn it that way, then hezekriya, the damage done, not a physical damage, the damage done by you looking into my yard, looking into my, ruining my privacy, is not considered a riya. Even though we both agreed to make the wall, to separate, doesn't have to be a wall. It's only if we both agreed to make the wall. So that's mashma, that if we both agree just to separate, then it doesn't have to be a wall. So Gemara says, maybe mechitza plukta. Maybe mechitza simply means we want to divide. We want to make a division. And which Hashuk and Shiratzu, Las's mechitza, if they agreed. Again, we're talking about a small area. The chutzner is not big enough that one can force the other to divide it. But if they both agreed to divide it, the time of the Ratzu, Be'ema, in the 4th line, Be'ema, mechitza book maybe simply means it's a division. Kirachsiv, as we see, Batia mechitza, Bati machza sa'eda, half of the Eda, the division of the Eda, half of the Eda. So it simply means they simply wanted to divide. Not that they wanted to make a wall. The kivan to Ratzu, once they agreed to divide it, then Bonan Asakosa, then you could force them to build a wall. In other words, we agreed to divide it, but we didn't agree on the terms. We just said we're going to divide it. When you agreed to divide it, you know what? Then one can force the other to build a wall. Bal Karchel, Alma has agreed. In other words, once we agreed to divide it, that you don't want to see in my area, I don't want to see in your area, now I can force you to build a wall. Not enough just to make a ribbon there. So why did it say that? It could have just said they wanted to split it. Why did it say that mechitza is not clear if mechitza means a wall or mechitza just means a division? Why did it say shiratzu lachas? Okay, so if you don't say that, what is the mechitza is really a wall? So why did it say bonus akoso? Why use a different lesson? Why did it say that ratzu las mechitza bonus akoso? You could have just said bonus somi boile. If mechitza means a wall, why did it say if they wanted to make a wall, this is how they build a wall with a different word? Bonus akoso. You could have just said bonus so. You didn't have to say bonus akoso. Bonus somi boile. Zitano savi amina v'mesibas me'alma. If it would just say, oh, so I might think a wall, if it would just say mechitza, okay, mechitza can mean a physical mechitza, right? Physical mechitza, like it, but maybe it would have meant simply with sticks, a mesipas, right? Like just like, mesipas is also like, what's the word in English? Pesipas, yeah, pesipas, but it's the same. It's the idea of sticks. It's a bunch of different little parts to it. I might maybe that, and that wouldn't be a problem with Riyah. Kamashman coastal says, so if you say coastal means a wall. So it could go either way. You could say that, he says, Savrua sounds like that's the Havamina. He says, but maybe they thought, what is Mechitza? Is Mechitza a wall? In which case, that if we say wall, maybe going to say that it has to be a real wall. Or is Mechitza simply a separation? Once he agreed to make a separation, they must build a wall because that's a Kriya Ishmei has. All right, so we'll pick it up here tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem. Right? We'll see what as it goes. So we'll say the Hadron, and then we'll see if we get him. By the time we finish the Hadron, we'll get it. Okay. So Halach Masechtas Mציעא v'Hadron Allah. Davam Masech Mציעא v'Daitach Lo Masashim Masechtas Mציעא v'Masashman Lo Bam Da'asi. Hadron Allah Masechtas Mציעא v'Hadrach Allah. Daita Allah Masechtas Mציעא v'Daitach Allah. V'Nasnashim Yinan Masechtas Mציעא v'Nasnashim Yinan Lo Bam Da'asi. Hadron Allah Masechtas Mציעא v'Hadrach Allah. Daitan Allah Masechtas Mציעא v'Daitach Allah. Masashman Masechtas Mציעא v'Sashim Lo Bam Da'asi. Here's something that Nachat Noel Hainu B'Yav Sim Shetei Torah Secha U'Manasena B'Mazevetei Marlon B'Achanim B'Papa Rami B'Papa Nachmar Papa Achoy B'Papa Abamori B'Papa Roch B'Papa Roch B'Papa Surcha B'Papa Ada B'Papa Dor B'Papa Harab Not Noel Hainu Esther Beis Rasam Finu U'Fias Amcha Beis Yisrael B'Nia Kulano Anachim Tzesayim Tzesayim Beis Yisrael Kulano Shmech of London Secha Me'ava Mitach Me'enu Tzech Ki Lolam Hi Li Sin Becha Maman Lo Evosh Amen, amen, amen. So bad. Here's something Adonai Lahakshim, Shaz Artani Masayim, Mesechtas Mציעא, Kentas Rein Lahaschim, Mesechtas Svar Machem, Matzayim, Little Mod, Lamed, Lishmo, Velasas, Ulakayim is called Ursa Secha Biava, Usus Kotanamba, Maram, Tamid Chacham, Yamar Liu, Zari, Shalotomash Ator, with P Zari, Bezera Zari, Ad Olam, Sky and Beavis, Alechatan Chasach, Bishachbaha, Gishmor Lacha, Bekitsa Hiti Sichacha, Kivi, Yebu Yamecha, Yosif Lachashnas Chaim, Orach Yam Bimina, the small ocean Chalad, Adonai also Moed Fain. I know it's Shalom. Get out of the may love all. Never thought of you, Shaman, who Saklo, if a lady got all make up of another from Ara, who asked for fun of Ishmael last day. Yeah, Mr. Shaman, who say the Korea, the High Court from the High Court of Israel. But I love this man, Korean for Have a good day, everyone.